Imagine you are a police officer. You have a suspect. You believe, genuinely believe, that he killed his wife, buried the truth, and is walking around free while her family falls apart. You have no body, no crime scene, no physical evidence. So you do something desperate. You send in a woman, a trained undercover officer. She answers his Lonely Hearts ad in a local newspaper, introduces herself as Liz, and over weeks and months, she builds something with him. Real conversations, real trust, something that starts to feel to him like love. And then one day, on tape, he tells her everything. I strangled her, but it wasn't easy. He says he burned her body in an incinerator. He says she's gone for good. The police have it all, every word, recorded, and then a judge throws it out. The jury never heard it. He walked free. And the woman who vanished, Patricia Hall, a 39-year-old Avon lady from a small town in Yorkshire, mother of 2 young boys, has never been found. Not a trace, not a bone, not a single sighting, not one withdrawal from her bank account. 34 years of nothing. In April 2026, a coroner finally opened an inquest into her presumed death. 34 years. This is the story of what happened, why it happened, and why the question of what really became of Patricia Hall has never, not once, gone away. Pudsey is the kind of town that doesn't make national headlines. A quiet, residential pocket of West Yorkshire, tucked between Leeds and Bradford. The kind of place where people know each other, where the same families live on the same streets for decades, where an Avon lady knows which neighbor prefers which perfume. That was Patricia Hall's world. She was 39 years old. She had 2 boys, Andrew, 9, and Graham, 5. She was known to friends and family simply as Pat. Her sister Christine later described her as someone who would never, under any circumstances, have left her children. On the 25th of January, 1992, Pat spent the day in Ripon with family members. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. A Sunday with relatives, ordinary, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of day that only becomes important in hindsight. 2 days later, on January 27th, her husband Keith reported her missing. His story: they had argued. Pat got into the car and drove away. She never came back. That was it. That was all he gave them. Neighbors, however, remembered that night differently. They recalled an argument, loud, vicious, the kind that made people pause and listen. And then they heard it just stop, suddenly, abruptly, and then, shortly after, the sound of a car driving away into the night. Pat's car was found abandoned less than a mile from the family home in Pudsey. Her clothes were still in the wardrobe. Her passport was at home. Her bank account never touched again. She had left everything, or everything had been left behind for her. West Yorkshire police launched a search. Woodland, rivers, the surrounding landscape of a Yorkshire winter, cold and gray and unforgiving. They found nothing, nothing at all, with no body, no crime scene, and a husband who had a story that fit the facts just enough to be difficult to disprove. Investigators faced a wall. Keith Hall cooperated to a point. He mourned to a point. He was the concerned husband, the confused widower, the man insisting his wife had simply driven away. But police didn't buy it. Not entirely, because what the neighbors had described, that argument, that sudden silence, that car disappearing, didn't match the image of a woman who packed nothing, withdrew nothing, and contacted nobody. Not her sons, not her siblings, not a single person who knew her. So they made a decision. They would go undercover. An officer, she would be known only as Liz, was assigned to get close to Keith Hall. The method: a Lonely Hearts advertisement in a local newspaper. Keith had placed one. Liz responded. What followed was months of careful, deliberate psychological work. Liz wasn't just flirting with a suspect. She was building a relationship brick by brick. Phone calls, meetings, intimacy, emotional, if not always physical. Keith, by all accounts, fell for it completely. By his own later admission, he believed he had found something real, and the more he trusted her, the more he talked. Liz wore a wire. Every conversation was being recorded. Police were listening, waiting, documenting. The question Liz kept returning to, gently, persistently, in the way someone genuinely worried would ask, was, what happens if Patricia comes back? What happens if she suddenly reappears? It was a psychological pressure point, carefully chosen, because if Keith had nothing to hide, the answer was simple. But if he knew Patricia was never coming back, because he knew why, the question would force him to confront what he'd done. And eventually, it did. On tape, Keith Hall told Liz that he had strangled Patricia, that it hadn't been easy, that he had disposed of her body in an incinerator, one that investigators later noted he had access to. The police had their confession. Here is where British law in 1994 did something that left an entire family without justice for 3 decades, and technically it did it correctly. Keith Hall was arrested, charged with murder. The case went to Leeds Crown Court. The prosecution had the tape. They had Keith's own voice describing in detail what he said he had done to his wife. And then his defense barrister stood up. The argument was precise and legally powerful. Keith Hall had not been interviewed under caution. He had not been told he had the right to remain silent. He had not been informed that the woman he thought he loved was a police officer recording his every word. The conversation with Liz, the defense argued, was effectively an interview, directed, probing, designed to extract information, without any of the legal protections that a formal police interview requires. Under Section 78 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, PACE, a trial judge can exclude evidence if its admission would adversely affect the fairness of proceedings. Mr. Justice Waterhouse agreed with the defense. The tape was ruled inadmissible. The jury never heard it. Without that recording, the prosecution had almost nothing. The case was circumstantial from every angle. A missing woman, a husband with a story, neighbors who heard arguing, a car found a mile away. The jury returned a not guilty verdict. Keith Hall walked out of Leeds Crown Court a free man, and then, in what the press described as an extraordinary and almost unprecedented move, the trial judge allowed the contents of the tape to be made public. The words that the jury had never been permitted to hear were suddenly everywhere. Every newspaper, every television broadcast, a man acquitted of murder, with his alleged confession printed on the front pages of the British tabloids. I strangled her, but it wasn't easy. He was legally innocent, but the public had heard what the jury had not. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. This channel exists for cases exactly like this one, where the law and the truth don't quite end up in the same place. Hit subscribe. It costs you nothing. Now, back to Pat. There is something particularly cruel about what happened to Patricia Hall's family after the verdict. Not only had they lost Pat, with no body, no grave, no place to put their grief, but now they were living in a country where a jury had said, not guilty, and the law had to be respected. Keith Hall went back to his life. He raised the boys. He drifted through various jobs. In 2011, nearly 2 decades after Pat vanished, he was jailed for 4 years for attacking a former neighbor with a brick. A compulsive liar, a detective would later call him, someone who constructed stories to survive. His statement after the 1994 acquittal was read by a solicitor. I hope everyone will now accept I did not murder my wife. It remains a mystery to me as to where she is and why she has never returned. Patricia's sister, Christine Weatherhead, has spent the decades since fighting. Not loudly. She didn't have a platform or a legal team or money for lawyers. She fought the way ordinary people fight systems, persistently, stubbornly, with the conviction that her sister was dead and deserved to be recognized as such. For years, Christine's campaign ran into a wall that felt almost designed to frustrate her. Patricia Hall was still classified as a missing person by West Yorkshire police, not deceased, missing. And because there had been no inquest, and because holding one risked potentially contradicting the court outcome, potentially, in effect, assigning blame to a man who had been acquitted, the Home Office and the chief coroner repeatedly refused to allow one. The law had its own internal logic, but Christine was living with the human cost of it. She said, "I feel the law supports Keith's rights, but what about Pat's? What about mine?" A journalist named Sharon Boyle spent 31 years following this case. She called Keith Hall every week. For 3 months at one point, she rang him and asked him the same question. "Did you kill your wife?" Every time he shrieked, denied it, ended the call, and then every single week he answered her again. She told the Yorkshire Post it made her blood run cold. She said, "I believe he was playing a game with me." Courts, in the meantime, quietly acknowledged what the criminal system could not. In 2001, Keith Hall was granted a divorce on the legal basis that Patricia was dead. In 2006, the High Court granted probate to her 2 sons, again on the basis that their mother was dead. Legally dead, but not officially, not with an inquest, not with findings, not with any formal acknowledgement of how she died, or why, or at whose hands. Christine kept applying, kept being refused, kept writing letters, kept turning up, and in April 2026, 34 years after Patricia Hall was last seen in Ripon with her family on a January Sunday, a coroner in Wakefield finally opened an inquest into her presumed death. Christine stood outside Wakefield Coroner's Court and cried. She said, "We've tried so many times over the last 34 years. It's quite a tremendous milestone. To finally get this day is hard to put into words." Coroner Oliver Longstaff opened the hearing and laid out the facts with careful legal precision. Patricia Hall was last seen alive on January 25, 1992. There have been no sightings of her since, no attempts to use her bank accounts, no contact with any family member, no contact with any social acquaintance, no evidence of any kind that she is alive. He said there is reason to suspect that Mrs. Hall's abrupt and complete disappearance is a consequence of her having died a violent or unnatural death. Keith Hall had been contacted about the opening hearing. He was, the coroner noted, unable to make arrangements to attend. The court said it would be inviting him to provide a statement. The cold case review conducted by West Yorkshire Police, launched in 2025, concluded, according to Assistant Chief Constable Sarah Jones, without any new lines of inquiry. No new evidence, no new leads. The review was thorough, she said, and it found nothing. So what can an inquest actually do here? Legally, an inquest can make findings on 4 things: who the deceased was, when they died, where they died, and how they came by their death. It cannot determine criminal liability. It cannot name a killer. It cannot undo an acquittal. But it can do something that 34 years of legal limbo have denied this family entirely. It can officially declare Patricia Hall dead. It can formally acknowledge that her disappearance was not voluntary, that something was done to her, and it can put her family's certainty on record in a court of law with a coroner's authority behind it. For Christine Weatherhead, that is not a small thing. She said her sister was a mother to us all. She said Pat would never have left her sons. Never. Not Andrew at 9, not Graham at 5, not for 34 years of silence. "Something untoward has happened to Pat," Christine said outside the court, "and hopefully this inquest will give us that evidence about what may have happened." This case sits at a very specific, very uncomfortable intersection in British legal history. The honey trap that caught Keith Hall's alleged confession was not unique. Just months after he was acquitted, in September 1994, a virtually identical operation collapsed in London. The infamous case of Colin Stagg, accused of murdering Rachel Nicholl on Wimbledon Common. An undercover officer named Lizzie James had spent months drawing Stagg into correspondence. A judge threw that evidence out too, called the entire operation reprehensible, and Stagg was released. Years later, in 2008, another man entirely was convicted of Rachel Nicholl's murder. Colin Stagg had been innocent all along. The Stagg case is why British courts treat honey trap operations with deep structural suspicion. When the defense in Keith Hall's trial argued entrapment, argued that Liz hadn't just been listening but actively steering the conversation, pushing, probing, extracting. They were pointing at something real in the law. But the two cases are not the same, because Colin Stagg was innocent, and Patricia Hall has never come home. Her clothes are still where she left them. Her passport is still where she left it. Her bank account has 34 years of silence in it. Her sons grew up without her. Her sister has spent 3 decades writing letters to coroners and chief constables and ministers. The law worked as it was designed to work. And it still feels, to everyone who loved Patricia Hall, like it failed. The inquest has been opened. It has been adjourned to a date to be fixed. Keith Hall has been asked to provide a statement. No one knows what the inquest will find. It cannot try him again. It cannot convict him. It can only, finally, after all this time, look at the evidence, weigh the facts, and say officially what Patricia's family has known since January 1992. She is dead. She did not leave on her own. She would never have left her boys. And somewhere in the silence of a Yorkshire winter, 34 years ago, something happened to her that the law has never been fully able to name. That tape still exists. Those words are still on record, and a family is still waiting for a coroner's court to give Patricia Hall, Avon lady, mother of 2, sister, daughter, the one thing she hasn't had in over 3 decades. Her name on a death certificate, her story told honestly, and a door finally closed.